Hi, everyone. My name's Ellen, and my co-speakers, Roisin and Nathan, have unfortunately been delayed due to issues in public transport. What should have been maybe a 20-minute journey to half hour, of course, private traffic in the city centre. But I might just say a bit about them before they arrive. So Nathan is the outgoing environmental officer for the Students' Union, and he's done an absolutely amazing job this year, as a lot of people in this room are aware. And Roisin is the outgoing chairperson. Nathan has just, of the Environmental Society, Nathan's just graduated from Environmental Sciences, and Roisin is going into her fourth year of that degree program. I am an English student, which means I know nothing but lots of passion. Um, but yeah, we're here today to talk about what a well-being economy would look like from the perspective of students within planetary boundaries. And I suppose it is kind of ironic that they've been delayed due to issues in public transport, because that is probably one of the major things that are, like, not only does it affect access to education, and it affects ability to be in a place on time, it's so important that we continue to reduce public transport fares, that we continue to improve public transport in Dublin.
Yeah, I think I'm studying environmental science and engineering. And in my course, it's sort of like once a week we get asked, how is the youth going to solve climate change? And that same discussion just like happens again and again and again. And I think the discourse around climate change is just so exhausted. I feel like I've been doing it every day since Fridays for Future, and it's like, what else can be achieved from more discussion when we know what we need to do? And it's just, yeah. But I do not thank you for having us.
Yeah, while it is wonderful to be here, obviously, it's just, I feel like we've kind of exhausted talking about the climate crisis and what young people think we should do about the climate crisis and what young people are going to do to save the world, and all these incredible tech solutions that are going to somehow provide salvation, when we actually know what needs to happen. It's just no one seems to be willing to do it. I mean, like Nathan, the last time you were speaking in this lecture theater, um,
I was dragged out. I got up and I yelled. I started yelling about in fact, Citibank were sponsoring that conference. It was on cryptocurrency, um, but hopefully this goes better. But like, yeah, I think it's just it strikes me as kind of frustrating that we keep framing this in terms of like the economy and like I think nearly we need to start talking less about like a well-being economy and more of ecology, if that makes sense. Like because I think this kind of financial model that we're all living under is very stressful, and obviously what we're doing is trying to change that in these kind of discussions. But I think even framing it as an economy to me seems like a tiny bit, I don't know, it's just using the language of oppression to me.
yeah, like using the language of profit to talk about well-being does seem kind of silly in some certain ways, because I mean, if we take a look at, like, we talk about Ireland having one of the highest GDPs in the world, and yet, and of course our quality of life is amazing here, but that incredibly high GDP, what does that translate to? Does it translate to any of our well-being as students? Like, I mean, last December, I come from an incredibly middle class background. Last December, I was working two jobs so I could afford to live in Dublin. I was exhausted. Like, my commute at the moment is an hour. I'm from Tipperary. I could probably commute by train and it would take the same amount of time. Um, there's just so many things prohibiting access to education. And furthermore, the fact that we're students in the first place, it means that we got here, but the problems facing students in Ireland at the moment are the same problems that are facing everyone else. The housing crisis, the cost of living, like,
Yeah, so I think the point that we're the ones that made it this far, we actually got into education that sort of neglects the huge population of people that can't afford it in the first place. Um, so we're the lucky few, and we're still Still kicking and still working.
Yeah, and I suppose like in a way that means that like I mean obviously when you talk about the well-being economy, a lot of it's kind of focused on environmental issues, but I suppose that same fight for a well-being economy in a lot of ways is translatable to student activism that's already happening. Like when we look at like, for example, throughout the year, there's the blockade of the Book of Kells happened several times. There was the encampment for Gaza and all those sort of various events. I think we're all pushing for a more socially kind sort of well-being economy, you know. But Trinity as an institution, despite the fact that it likes to host these conferences frequently, doesn't really act in a kind of a commensurate way in terms of like how it treats students. Like it was going to raise the rents on students by the maximum amount it could this year until we went and we blocked the Book of Kells. So I think a lot of the times like direct action is what's kind of necessary in order to force institutions to change. And this kind of sitting around talking, while it's great for sponsoring ideas, I think what's really necessary is what happens next and what people go out and do in the real world. That'll be my perspective anyway.
Yeah, Trinity has been quite responsive to the various direct actions in terms of the fossil-free campaign. And now we're sort of looking more at partnerships with Coca-Cola and Ryanair and different Blue Skies research. Yeah.
And I suppose a lot of people here will be aware that Trinity recently renewed its partnership with Ryanair, which styles itself as Europe's greenest airline, despite the fact that it was also Europe's most polluting airline in 2022. I believe the provost was quoted as saying, you know, that Trinity is reflected as being like having been judged 17th in the world for the impact rankings, like in being in line with UN sustainability goals. And it's true, we have been that in 2020. We're now currently somewhere between 200th and 300th.
We dropped over 100 places in the sustainability rankings last year. And yeah, I just want to point out, to kind of loop back to that Ryanair thing, that we received 1.5 million funding from Ryanair to launch the Sustainable Aviation Research Centre. I have no doubt that the people working there are entirely legitimate people working on projects, but it's Ryanair's only big flagship green project, and it is the one they kind of brag about on their website. And realistically, it's like a tiny, tiny fraction of their profits, like 1.5 million. And I raised this at a meeting with the vice provost several times throughout this year, that you know we need policies in place so we stop greenwashing these massive corporations that are just after profit. And yet, despite that, we renewed that partnership recently for another 2.5 million euro, and we're just continuing to greenwash. Similarly, if you look up Coca-Cola on Trinity's partnership website, it says that this is providing massive health benefits for the college, and that's Coca-Cola. And you know, it's just like they're also the world's 5th biggest plastic polluter. No, sorry, they're the world's biggest. Yeah.
Their partnership is specifically with Trinity Sport, not even Trinity the college, which is crazy. And similar irony with the green sponsorship from Ryanair. Before entering into that green research, they had to build the E3 building. Which is before they to be sustainable.
That's a very big cementy building.
Very big cementy building with lots of cranes.
Yeah, so I suppose just going back to the idea of the well-being economy, how do you guys think that like we as students can advocate for it, do you think?
I think in lots of ways it's happening. And we have seen historically that student movements can be impressively productive. But our influence is over like this small community. And it's sometimes difficult, maybe I'm just disillusioned, to see how that influence can go beyond us.
It's very defeating when, like, I mean, it's already so difficult to access college in Ireland. Like, we have the highest fees in the EU. Like, Trinity in particular, like, what financial support do they provide for students? Like, I think if you get the highest grade in your school coming in, you get like €100 book voucher. And on top of that, to be told that we need to change the world, we need to like muster ourselves up or something like that, and like, you know, transform a system that we inherited and that we can't really help being part of. And then every time we do try to do that, I mean, the Students' Union is hit with a 200K fine. So like, sorry, 214. But I mean, I think that what the students are saying, they have been saying for years. And it's not a matter of discussing it anymore. It is a matter of actually copping on and listening.
I mean, I can't imagine that anyone assumes that we want a partnership with Coca-Cola and Ryanair. Doesn't seem to align with any student values I'm aware of.
Yeah, I suppose like when it comes to whose voices are in the room and whose voices are out of the room, I think like you said, like we are very privileged to be here, but there's so many students that don't. And I just kind of I think yesterday listening to kind of the talk about education system, it just strikes me like I think only about half an Ireland people. I think it's going up at the moment, but like I think only about 50% of Irish people go on to do third level education, and like that's obviously quite a high figure, you know, globally. So like there's the voices of who's excluded from the room, and that's quite a large amount of people, and they're the people kind of dealing with this, a lot of the downsides of this economy. Like we're dealing with the benefits of this economy. So if we do want to keep doing these conferences, that's really just benefiting the people in this room. It's not benefiting society as a whole, and that's maybe the big issue. And I think change is going to come. Like this current system is going to collapse at some point. And it's just kind of like, at the moment, it's how are we going to, you know, deal with that? Because we're not able to live with the amount of warming and the amount of pollution and the amount of like, the stress that's on everyone, the system of exploitation that's on everyone every single day. We're not able to live with that. So what's going to come next is the question, you know?
I'm so sick of hearing towards and working towards like every day. It's just we don't need minor changes. I can't see how we're going to get to our end goal if it's a gradual change.
Uh, yeah, I'd be happy. Any questions?
Has anybody got a question? There was a person here had their hand up. Hi. Sorry, just there you are.
So thank you for speaking today, guys. I think your perspectives are very important. I specifically want to ask, what role would you like to see staff and academics have in direct action, student advocacy? Because I think often students are left hung out to dry, and academics might agree with them in principle, but might not be out there in them with action. And I think, to reiterate a speaker from yesterday, fuck degrees, I think we need to break down these sort of arbitrary hierarchical structures of prestige and start creating more equal student, staff, academic networks, direct action, et cetera. And I'm just wondering how you guys, if you think that's a good idea, and how you would see that implementing and how you'd like support. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. There's a little story I can share. Dr. Claire Kelly, who was speaking yesterday, actually lectured me for one of my modules, and as part of her module, we actually carried out a protest. And then she came and spoke at our protest outside the door. So that was like a really good example of how the kind of partnership I think can work. But I think a lot of, I find it quite frustrating. It's kind of slightly frustrating as a student. I studied environmental science, and it was quite frustrating to see my lecturers every day just go like, we're going through the 6th mass extinction, and it's terrible. And then they just go on about living their normal lives. And I find that quite an alienating and nearly kind of distressing situation to be in. So I think you know, you look at groups like, I guess, Scientists Rebellion and that kind of thing that are kind of like putting their bodies on the line. And I think there's kind of two aspects to that. I think there's both advocacy within universities to make universities take more political stances. For example, I was trying to put pressure on the college to endorse the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Despite over a year of pressure on that front, they still haven't done that, despite that being the most basic thing. So I think if academics start backing those sort of student initiatives, that's one part of it. And another part of it is actually going and trying to force wider society to make changes, and doing that in collaboration with students and listening to what students want. Do either of you have a point?
Agree.
Okay. If you're, are you happy to agree with that? Or do you want to take another question? Just
Yes.
I don't want to cut you off.
The only thing to add, I think, is just paying postgrads.
Is what? Sorry, say that again.
Paying postgrads.
All right. Paid postgrad. Yeah, paid postgrad. Okay, we'll take time for one more question here. well, I know people. Oh, there's one here.
Thanks. It's been crossing my mind, resonating with what you said at the outset, the unreality of our situation, just not here in this room, but globally. I'm writing a paper on climate change currently, and that's unreal, because if you compare our situation, if that heading was reworded like this, what does a peace economy look like after the end of the Second World War? If we were in Blitzkrieg, London, having this meeting with students as to what a peace economy would look like after that war, because in some ways, the climate change problem is even worse than the Second World War, right? But that would dramatize it. Then that would be totally unreal, because while we're having the conference, a bomb would come through the ceiling. Thanks.
So not a question then? Has anybody got an actual question? Yeah, we have a few down the back here. Oh, well, these people were waving frantically. It better be good. If there's any pontificating, I'm taking the mic off you.
No pontificating, a simple question. I can see your commitment to addressing the climate change. In terms of the wider student body in Trinity and other colleges around Dublin and other cities, how engaged are the wider student body outside of the committed group like you?
I think I can answer this pretty well, because I was recently having a conversation with my younger sister about this, and she turned to me and snapped and said, you know what, if everyone was as political as you, I would be exhausted all the time. I'm so glad they're not. I think it really does depend. You've got this, I don't think there's anyone who's not aware of climate change. And I don't think there's anyone who doesn't see it as a threat from our, say, generation. But I mean, they're still just students, they're still just people, they're still living their normal lives. The same way people have been living normal lives in the systems they've been raised in for years upon years upon years. Not everyone is going to be completely engaged in changing a system at any given point. And they shouldn't have to be. Like, it's again this idea of putting the responsibility on young people who, like, I don't know, maybe just wanted to grow up, have a job, have a family. Like, why are they expected to be the ones who are completely on top of things all the time? It's always the young people. It's always somehow they who are going to transform things. And I would say everyone is very aware of the reality of climate change, but not everyone is engaged with it. And part of that is because they're exhausted by it.
But I do think despite that burnout that is prevalent everywhere, there is like pockets of very active movements, which we saw with all the encampments around Ireland. Like, they do exist, but it's very easy to get burnt out. So they kind of exist in pockets, in moments.
Yeah, just very quickly, like I suppose I would agree with what everyone said, but also I think there is very much a frustration at the current system. It might always show itself in climate change because that's quite abstract for us here, but there's so much frustration around housing, there's so much frustration around these other issues, and I think that's going into this kind of frustration at the overall kind of growthist, capitalist, neoliberal model that's in place, and I think that's really starting to burst through at the moment.
Okay, thank you. We have sort of come to the end, not sort of, we have come, talking like a student now, like, know what I mean, like. So like, I mean, we have like, got like to the end of the like session. Sorry, I'm taking the piss. I shouldn't, I'm just jealous that I'm not a student any longer. I think, well, just if I can throw in my tuppence worth, why is everybody looking at you? Because you are the ones who don't have the tied down job. Well, I know you have 2 jobs, but you haven't got the life commitments yet. So we're all looking to you to be the ones who don't have as much to lose by going and doing direct action and loving being dragged out of places before the maws of the machine get you in the scripts. And
well, we're looking right back at you.
I know, don't worry, I've been dragged out of more places than you have. Oh, I've been dragged out of plenty of places for many things. No, I'm not saying that as an accusatory. I think everybody, that is why, if you're saying why do people look? Because it's a hopeful thing. We're hoping, aren't we? Aren't we hoping that that there is a freedom? But the sad thing that's reflected here is obviously that you don't feel free, any freer. And we salute your efforts. I would love to know, what does Trinity say when you ask them about Coca-Cola and Ryanair? I know you touched on it, but about the provost said, oh, they're a very big supporter or something.
So when I emailed the head of the commercial revenue unit, they said, please get in contact with President of the TCSU, Laszlo Molnarfi, to get in contact with us. So there's this kind of bureaucratic top-down thing that they try to stop us engaging. And then the other thing is there's frequently this like, oh, we need to work with businesses, as if Ryanair, as if Michael O'Leary, who said we should shoot climate protesters and who has said the most appalling things about immigrants recently, actually cares about people, as if that's going to make a big difference, is kind of what they also bring up. Yeah.
Let's go and storm their office now. Come on, there's more of us than there are of them. Come on. Well, listen, thank you. Thank you very much for taking your time. Please give them a huge round of applause to all three. We appreciate your... And Peter's going to be interviewing the minister later on, so he was wondering if you could maybe suggest a question or two for the minister that you would like. Maybe you could go and have a chat with him. We will be right back with the much talked about, never actually seen on the stage yet, Dr. John Barry, very shortly, among others. So thanks again to the students. Thank you.